So I've got a quick spiel I have to run through, which is welcome to this virtual meeting. This is a formal council committee. The public proceedings will take place live on the internet. The meeting will be recorded for future viewing. It will assist the conduct of business if participants speak only when invited. Members of the public are welcome to view the proceedings, but should not make contributions at this meeting. All members of the committee have received the reports in advance and had the opportunity to read them. As it is, there weren't any reports in advance this time. The reports will be published on the internet, and we'll work out how to do that at some stage. All participants should mute their microphones and video feed when they're not speaking. Anyone wishing to speak should indicate using the raise your hand button on Microsoft Teams. Now, I'm not certain if people know where that is on mine now. It shows at the top of the screen. If for some reason you can't do that, if you just flick your video on and off, we'll know that you want to speak. Or alternatively, you can use the chat facility if you know how to use it. Please remember to unmute your microphone and switch on your video feed. When it's your turn to speak, speak clearly and slowly into your microphone. If you don't have the hand button, please type your request to speak in the chat function. I should have read this beforehand. When the item on which you have contributed is concluded, you may leave the meeting by using the red hang up button if you wish. Finally, I ask for everyone's patience with the use of this technology and apologise in advance for any unforeseen difficulties, which we shall always try to resolve. So, Karen, any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chair.
Pete, you've put your video on and that's it, it's gone now. Right. Any substitute members?
No, Chair.
That's lovely. Any declarations of interest under the Members' Code of Conduct? Don't see that there would be. And I'm virtually signing the minutes of the meeting held on the September. Can I have you confirm that the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of September are a correct record?
Agreed.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you. That's lovely. Right. I'm virtually signing them as I speak. Right. So the meeting's a bit different tonight. We've asked for the Chief Executive to give a report on the strategic direction of the council. That's the first item on the agenda. The second item after that will be procurement and social value, sort of presentation stroke training event for us. And then right at the end, we've got a question or two questions under Council Procedure Rule 11.8 that I will read out, but I also have a comment that the committee may wish to take on board at that time. So, sir, where's he gone? Oh,
what an introduction. Thank you much indeed, Chair. Those amongst us who are far more technologically able than I will know, hopefully, if Karen's got it there, will pop up a presentation through PowerPoint. Have you got it there, Karen?
Yes, Manjit.
I'm just going to share.
Oh, Manjit's got it. Okay,
I'm just going to share it. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen at all?
Not yet, no.
Not yet. Can you see anything now?
Yes, that's perfect. If you can pop into slideshow, that would be superb, Manjit.
There we go. Can you still view it?
Yes, that's perfect. I hope members can see that.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yes, we can.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much indeed. Well, firstly, thank you much indeed, Chair, for inviting me to join you this evening and to give, I suppose, a bit of a helicopter view of the strategic direction of the council. But in terms of where the council is, it's probably as well that we understand where the council has been and what our direction of travel is going to be like. So I've just asked Manager to put up on screen now the first slide, and this is about our service delivery during COVID, because I'm sure it's the case that none of us, without the assistance of a crystal ball, would have possibly gathered or garnered from the breaking news we had prior to Christmas about events in China, how significantly and how seriously this would have affected the lives of us all right around the world, but particularly the United Kingdom and for our purposes in Dudley. One thing was very, very clear, however, was that during January and February, I was speaking to my then Director of Public Health, Debs, and inviting her to give me some idea as to what the events in China may have in store for the UK. And obviously, we now know that on the 23rd of March, we went into national lockdown for the first time. But in the middle of February, the advice from Public Health England, which I then had Debs to share with SEB and indeed with both informal and also in a meeting cabinet. The advice from Public Health England during February was that the COVID-19 virus outbreak in China posed a very low risk to the UK. A week later, that risk rate was heightened, and as we now know, within 3 weeks of that, we were plunged into national lockdown. One of the key things that we began to do as a strategic executive board chaired by myself with my directors was in the probably I should think the first week or two of March was to start wargaming, as it were. What might this look like for us in Dudley as the infection began to spread around the world? And to preserve our own resilience, what we did was begin as directors to start meeting remotely using what we now know as the essential tool of MS Teams. So even though we were either in the council house, and I know Ian's on the call, and Ian's office is directly below mine, and other colleagues were within the civic campus, as it were, we began meeting by MS Teams, A, to test the system, and B, to ensure our own resilience as directors, that we would not, if one of us became infected, take the rest down. I pay tribute to our ICT colleagues who had proposed in their standard work plan for this year to roll out MS Teams during the late spring. And that proposed rollout, I recall, was for a 3 or 4 week period. But it was quite clear in mid-March that we were heading towards a lockdown, and our ICT team rolled out what would have been a 3 or 4 week programme developing MS Teams into just 5 short days leading up to the 23rd of March lockdown, so that we invited all of the staff that could work from home, that they should work from home and take their ICT kit home to check it to make sure it was viable and that any glitches could be ironed out so far as was practicable before what we anticipated would be the lockdown of the 23rd of March. So the 23rd of March, which now seems to many of us like several hundred years ago, came. We entered lockdown, and the majority of my staff that could work from home began so to do. And I think it's fair to say that based upon that backbone of ICT that underpinned our ability to carry on delivering both back office and frontline services, that has led to the success we've had, both in delivering services in the borough and also testing some of the new technology which underpins what I'll be developing in the presentation to the future direction of travel for the council. So looking at the infographic which you now see, I've had several infographics developed by CAPA, which capture some of the key performance targets that we were achieving, notwithstanding the lockdown. Just to zoom in on one or two of them, on the top line you will see there that over 4,800 businesses within the borough had the lifeline of Ian Newman and his team efficiently dispersing north of £55 million in record time to maintain those businesses during their time of need. This is the third infographic that I've had, and various services that couldn't be highlighted in earlier ones have asked if they could be highlighted in subsequent versions, and one of those was our pest control colleagues, and you'll see the perhaps somewhat unappealing outline of a rat or a mouse there to indicate that notwithstanding the lockdown, where there were more instances of infestation, that we were able to keep that under control with a 7% increase. And I was down with our colleagues at Lister Road earlier on today, where again increases in service delivery were achieved, notwithstanding the lockdown, so that, for example, 7% more recycling was put through the system than in a comparable period last year. You will see also from the infograph that over 130 bulletins have been issued to the public and to members and to staff. In terms of our interaction with the public, the increase in usage of the council's, in my view, excellent resources around COVID-19 has surged to the roof. And also today I was down with colleagues at DC Plus who've been handling a huge volume of calls in a COVID secure way. But this infograph is just one instance. It's the third iteration. I know I've sent out the first 2 iterations to members, that we have been able to maintain service delivery and indeed cope with surges in demand for things like recycling, where a population, to some extent largely at home, were able to focus their activities on recycling and other activities which otherwise would not have been foreseen. But certainly a sharp learning curve that my staff have dealt with in a way which I consider to be admirable. I sound a bit like the gentleman, the Chief Medical Officer, who says on the 5 o'clock bulletins now, "Next slide, please." So I shall use that time-honoured phrase. And Manjit, if you can press the button to our next slide. Thank you much indeed. So again, to understand where we are going, it's probably as well we have an understanding of where we currently are with regard to infection rates. Now, Dudley, throughout the pandemic, has had historically the lowest rates of infection within the West. But it's a bit like looking at, I suppose, the Grand National, where one horse is in the lead, then a different horse is in the lead, and then somebody comes from behind and so forth. But there has been a levelling up of infections across the West Midlands. To some extent, those areas that are perhaps the more rural, like South Staffordshire, have now been peaking to have levels of infection which are higher than in Birmingham and Sandwell, which led the race, as it were, in the early days. Now, does that mean that there are more infections? I suspect it doesn't. What it means is that I prefer to refer to the infections not as infections, but instead as detected infections. And as our ability to test has increased, the more you test, the more you find that there are infections. And I suppose the analogy I've used in the past is that if everyone in the borough drove their cars until a low oil indicator popped up on the dashboard, you'd probably find that only a handful of drivers would have that low oil indicator pop up. If everyone in the borough popped the bonnets and actually tested their oil, you'd probably find that there are dozens and dozens more people who would find, as a result of that testing, that they had low oil levels. And it's much the case as far as infection is concerned. So lots of people will say anecdotally that in the first lockdown, there weren't many people they knew who had tested positive for COVID. And that is because we didn't have the testing ability across the country in those days to achieve that degree of clarity. Now that we have enhanced testing, we are detecting many, many more. So before the most recent lockdown, the figures on the screen, which I don't need to read out to you, they will give the equivalent number of cases, because we always across the country express the number of detected cases per 100,000 of population. And as we know that Dudley has, as near as damn it, 320,000, you simply multiply the figure per 100,000 of population to establish the weekly number of cases that we are handling. And across the region and across the country, there are pockets of high instances of infection, but generally speaking, notwithstanding the tiering of tiers 1, 2 and 3, the infection numbers are possibly now somewhat academic because the infection rate is endemic within the population once again. We do have, of course, being rolled out the new testing regime, which people are likening to almost like a pregnancy testing kit, where you get a fairly instant result within half an hour. But the more we're able to test, the more we're able to detect infection and obviously contain that infection. And we've heard obviously this week of significant advances in medicine around inoculation. But that this slide and the preceding slide, what I've said so far, gives us an idea of where we have been and where we are as we look forward in terms of the strategic direction of the council going forward. The next slide, please, Manjit. So on this this next slide, I'd like to talk about the Borough Vision. And the analogy I'll use here, it's a bit like, I suppose, with my annual review for each of our staff. So for each of our staff, we look at what they've achieved in the previous year and what they would hope to achieve in the forthcoming year. That's the retrospective look and then the forward look in my annual review. But if I think about my career in the early days, you know, when I was 18, which was many years ago, if I'd looked simply on an annual basis as to how I'd become qualified as a solicitor, that wouldn't be a great way of looking at things. What I would need to do is look at the 6-year cycle it takes to train a solicitor and identify where I wanted to be, not next year, but where I wanted to be 6 years hence. And that's the analogy I'll use as far as the Borough Vision is concerned, because many organisations, both public and private, not just in the West Midlands or the UK, but internationally, have developed visions for the way in which they seek to deliver services or the way in which they seek to deliver placemaking for 10 years hence, or as when the Borough Vision was envisaged, it was probably, I think, 12 or 13 years hence. But it's just like the career planning for any student aspiring to go into a profession. You don't look at what's in the next year or the year after. You look at what the long game is and plan for the long game. And that's the Borough Vision. So the Borough Vision looks at 7 aspirations, each of which has a lead, because of course the council isn't the only player in town, as it were. So in terms of being an affordable and attractive place to live, in other words, for placemaking and social interventions, that is led by the council. In terms of education and skills, and as we know, when the Borough Vision was first created, the IoT was very much an aspiration, but it's now turning into very much a concrete reality. That Dudley College, initially through Lowell, but now through Neil Thomas, lead on education and skills. Our new Bishop Dudley, Bishop Martin, he is incredibly enthusiastic about his role as the bishop. He sits on the Borough Vision board, which has been repurposed during COVID, and he leads on healthy, resilient and safe communities. And Stuart Everton, my former colleague from my last authority at Wolverhampton, sits across the Black Country as the Director of Transportation, and his lead is on high quality and, above all, affordable transport. And again, of course, we have the exciting links with the £449 million investment for the Midland Metro extension. Corinne Crane leads on innovation and prosperous business. Andrew from the Black Country Living Museum leads on the place to visit and enjoy. And of course, one of the critical metrics as far as our borough is concerned, not only do we have our own castle, which is unique in the West Midlands, we have our own zoo, again, a great attraction. We have the UNESCO badge, we have our wildlife parks, and also we have the Tunnel and Canal Trust, as well as the Black Country Living Museum. And all of that, along with ancillary spend on food and beverage and accommodation, means that our visitor offer is worth £500 million, £500 million to the borough each year. So again, another critical arm in developing the vision for 2030. And vibrant towns and neighbourhoods, That's led by Eve O'Connor, Eve being the Chief Executive of the Halesowen Business Improvement District, the BID. And Eve, again, passionate about delivering on high streets, or as we look forward to what will become repurposed high streets. And again, it's by no accident that Halesowen was hailed at the emerging from the last lockdown as one of the centres or 10 centres that had the biggest resurgence in footfall from shoppers after the last lockdown ended. And again, that's a tribute to Eve and a tribute to her staff, because I work on the basis that excellence never happens by accident. Now, before I go on to the next slide, one of the key things that I sought to instill in staff upon appointment was that we had to raise the profile of the borough. And in doing so, to deliver our vision for 2030, certainly as far as the council is concerned, we have 5 key audiences. The first audience is our internal audience. That's our elected members and our staff. Because I was surprised to learn, but only because it wasn't brought to my attention, that our colleagues who look after green space, they had won 2 national awards from the Royal Horticultural Society last year. The Royal Horticultural Society gave out 4 awards. Dudley had won 2, and the other 2 were won by Hampton Court Palace and the Eden Project. And I only found out about that by accident. So one of the key audiences we have is our internal audience, to ensure that colleagues across the authority understand and learn about good practice and achievements like awards, and that is shared with elected members. Our second key audience is the borough. So that's our residents and businesses, that we keep in contact with those. Now you can see, obviously, there are some examples of Home Magazine to the right of the slide. Our third key audience is the regional audience, to make sure that we are in the ear of the combined authority. And I was one of the lawyers that worked on the constitution of the combined authority a number of years ago. And one of the key things for the Black Country is we're not the junior partner in this. 4 of the 7 authorities that comprise the combined authority, 4 of us are in the Black Country, 4 in 7. And that's a key audience for us, to make sure that we're in the ear of the combined authority to get our fair share of investment and exposure. The fourth audience we have is our national audience, and that's raising the borough's profile on a national stage. I'll come back to that in my last slide. And our last key audience is the international audience, to make sure that the borough is seen as the place to come and invest for foreign investors when they're looking for somewhere to put their money in the West Midlands. Again, it is by no accident that a number of local football clubs are owned by foreign investors. It is by no accident that 1/2 of the Birmingham Airport is owned by an investment arm of the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund in Canada, because the Midlands is investable, and Dudley is slap bang in the centre of the Midlands, with a historic past and a vibrant future. So those are our 5 key audiences. The next slide, please, Manjit. So the next slide demonstrates the Dudley Council Plan. And if you remember harking back to my analogy of my own career, at the age of 18, I had to look forward 6 years to what it would take to qualify as a solicitor. So that would be the analogy to the Borough Vision of 2030. That's the long game. But how do you get there? You get there in bite-sized chunks. And the Dudley Council Plan is the plan that's renewed on a 3-year basis, that takes us step by step, incrementally and reflectively, towards delivering that Borough Vision. And you'll see around the triangular shape in the centre of the screen there, around the outside are our core values of determination, working together, excellence, simplicity, accountability, and empowerment and respect. And then around the periphery of that, we have those issues, those areas that we will focus on in that 3-year cycle as we forge a future for all, which is the Borough Vision. So where are we in our journey to delivering that Borough Vision? So if we go to the next slide, you will see that there are the Future Council 2030. How is it we're going to get from where we currently are towards that vision in 2030? Now, that slide illustrates that the original Future Council programme had 5 key themes that reflected the direction of travel, and those were around future workforce, our economy, our estates, our communities and technology. But there's been an opportunity to review that, and COVID has helped us deliver a more focused Future Council programme. So within our reaction to COVID, there have been lessons that have been very rapidly learned. And as such, the new and emerging Future Council programme has been streamlined to 3 core themes. And again, this is the bit that we as a council can deliver towards that 7-strand Future Council, future borough agenda, the vision for 2030. And the 3 that we're focusing in on are the future workforce, the future of technology, and our future facilities. And again, I shan't read what the bullet points are within the slide you have there, but those are the things that we are focusing in on in order to deliver what we can deliver in terms of the council plan until its refresh. Now, before I joined the authority, we'd had an LGA, Local Government Association Corporate Peer Challenge that was led by the then Chief Executive of Doncaster Council, Joe Miller, and there was an outcome arising from that report. And what I wished to do as soon as I took up post was to get the LGA back in and give me an unbiased temperature check as to how far we had moved along that trajectory to delivering Future Council. The next slide, please, Manjit. So the LGA peer review that came in I think it's 2017, we weren't able to get the same people back to do the refresh because Joe Miller had left Doncaster to take up a post as a chief executive in New Zealand. So we asked the LGA to put together a new peer review team that was led by Robin Tuddenham, the chief executive of Calderdale, and had a leader from a Conservative council and a leader from a Labour council, plus some senior directors drawn from other authorities in the UK. They spent the best part of a week meeting more than 150 members of staff, councillors and stakeholders. And the key features that they drew out was that there was a genuine pride and commitment to place, and the council has a pivotal role to play. Now, whenever I go around the authority, I find that quite unlike any other authority that I've worked at, our officers are very, very experienced and have been with the authority for very many years and take a huge pride in the borough and a huge pride in working for Dudley Council. I mean, today I was speaking to officers down at Lister Road. I think the average length of service was around 20 years. One had been there 43 years. And I know that Mike Bosworth, for example, that we shouldn't take his name in vain. I presented Mike with a clock this year because Mike had spent 50 years in local government and each of his 50 years has been at Dudley. So we have committed workforce. The LGA peer review also identifies some key improvement work that remains in certain areas. And they indicate it's been perhaps difficult to prioritise long-term ambitions, but there need to be a better alignment between the borough's vision, which we've discussed in the last few minutes, our budget, and also monitoring our performance. And if what they indicated as the bottom line, as it were, is it can be achieved through effectively harnessing staff, our assets, and our resources in a collaborative way forward. So that's what we've been doing, going along towards the 2030 vision, doing a refresh of the corporate plan and looking at the way in which we can deliver Future Council. But you'll recall what I mentioned probably about 5-10 minutes ago, that last year I wasn't aware that we had won 2 key awards out of 4 national awards, but our Green Care team had actually won that, but it wasn't being trumpeted. It wasn't reaching the key audiences it needed to reach. So what I've been encouraging officers to do is twofold. Firstly, to identify areas of best practice elsewhere in the country for their service areas and bring that back and translate that into Dudley, so we don't reinvent the wheel, but we capitalise on good and best practice elsewhere. And secondly, where we're doing well, and we are doing well right across the piece, that we make sure that our staff get that recognition by way of external awards for their endeavour. And if we get external awards, that obviously plays not only to our 2 theme audiences, key audiences regionally, but also raises the profile of Dudley on the national stage. The next slide, please. And certainly in the course of the last year or so, notwithstanding COVID, we have been recognised in many areas. APSI indicated that we were the 3rd most improved council in the UK. The week before last, I was delighted to find that the hard work that HR are doing to ensure that the apprenticeship levy that we would otherwise have to pay back to central government is being used prudently and effectively within the council to enhance the services that we're able to deliver by upskilling our own staff and growing our own. And we were in the top 100 employers in the UK for the effective use of the apprenticeship levy. We were number 43, in fact. No other local authority in the West Midlands was in that top 100, and we were way ahead of organisations that employ many thousands and more staff than we employ. We were way ahead of Tesco, we were way ahead of Marks and Spencer, we were way ahead of a number of large players in the country, and indeed some multinationals, and that's no mean feat. But again, it's recognition for the hard work and endeavour that we are undertaking within the authority. The week before last, we were finalists for the Local Government Association Awards. You can see there, Best Service Delivery Model, that's Project Rita, from Matt Boucher's Adult Services area. Health and Social Care, the falls prevention work, again from his area, and also the innovative work that our guys down at Lister Road and in Mary Stevens Park have been doing with Dudley Mind, called Growing in the Park. Heidi Marsh-Gayton won an award for the Best Partnership of the Year. That's around the work she's doing with a company in Shrewsbury around tackling a mattress, the so-called Mattress Mountain. Adult Social Care again is going to be recognised by the National Langbuisson Awards for our response to COVID-19. The comms team are up for an award for recognition, and they've been shortlisted for the work they've done around communications during COVID. RSPCA Paw Prints Bronze Award, the Parks Award from the Royal Horticultural Society I've mentioned, and of course the fantastic work that Graham Wharton's been doing and winning for the Black Country, but centred around Dudley, the international status of UNESCO status for the Black Country. And last, they put on their MIPIM. That's the International Trade Conference that should have taken place this year in the south of France. It'll be taking place next June instead. It's been rescheduled, where Dudley will have its stall, ensuring that the story of Dudley is told and reinforced, that we are very much open for business. Chair, thank you much indeed. That's my overview of the vision for the council and the vision for the borough.
Thank you, Kevin. Right, questions, points of anybody, please. Chris Barnett.
Sorry for interrupting, Chair. I'm just checking as my screen stopped sharing.
Yes.
It has.
Yes,
Mandy,
yes,
yeah.
it has.
Thank
yes,
you.
sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've
Carry
double
on.
muted myself. Yes, Karen, it has. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for that presentation, Kevin. It was interesting to hear what's been happening with the council and what's happening in the future. I must say, Chair, it would have been nice to have this presentation in advance. This is a scrutiny committee after all, and it's difficult to scrutinise reports on the fly as they're being presented. I just thought I'd ask really. We saw a slide about the Borough Vision 2030 and the Dudley Council Plan for 2019 to 22, and neither of them specifically mentioned climate change, which I'm a little surprised about. And I can see that it could be within the text there, and it could be part of those individual actions that are going on. From my point of view, I think it's a very serious topic and important. I'd prefer to see it highlighted more. Maybe if I'd seen the presentation in advance, I might have been able to discover where it was more mentioned. And I do have one question, which is regarding the future council. Personal, hobby horse, improve cycling facilities. I'd love to know when and what and where and how that's all going to work. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question, Councillor. I didn't share the presentation beforehand. Were to report, naturally I'd share it, but I think presentations lose their punch if they're shared beforehand, because then you know exactly what I'm going to say. It's a bit like a conjurer showing the outcome of the trick before they actually do the lead up beforehand. So my apology, it wasn't shared, but it wasn't my intention so to do. I would obviously share a report, but I think a presentation is usually better. It's punchier if delivered, and obviously to be circulated after the meeting. You're entirely right, Councillor. There's nothing expressly in there as far as climate change is concerned, because of course the Borough Vision was written some 3 years ago, and the council plan will be refreshed next year. But of course the council plan is, whilst it's refreshed in a formal sense next year in 2021, operationally we're making adjustments. So of course when the climate emergency was declared, operational adjustments are made. But equally, you're right as far as climate emergency is concerned. A lot of the stuff which I can badge as green, as it were, is taking place across the borough. The declaration of a climate emergency simply fuses it together into a coherent direction of travel. But certainly we will know, for example, the housing stock is being insulated. We'll know that there are steps being taken in various directorates to ensure that that those sorts of green issues and ecological issues are being tackled. But it's being drawn together, as you rightly say, of late into a more coherent iteration and a narrative. In terms of sorry, I didn't make it. I've made a note of the second part of your question. Cycling. But my handwriting is so dreadful I can't now read it.
Yes, it was cycling, Kevin.
Cycling, of course it was. So if you look at the issues around transportation, you'll know, for example, that in terms of cycling, that there's a lot of work being done. One of the key things that I was pressing for, but we didn't get, was the developing upon the success of the Velo, that we might have the Commonwealth Games road race actually coming through the borough. Now, it doesn't appear that's going to be the case. But in terms of green travel plans, you'll know that green travel plans will be part and parcel of the, part and parcel of many planning applications. And whilst not expressly stated in the current version iteration of the corporate plan, it's something that necessarily we will incorporate for the refresh in 2021.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
Serena, please.
Thank you. Again, it's a great report, and it's wonderful what our officers have really achieved, so it's really commendable to them. If this pandemic that we're in at the moment continues at the level that it is, what impact will it have for the future that you've just discussed, regards to funding, planning, etc., for each department?
Well, thank you. That's a really, really good question. And I suppose the honest answer is we don't know at this stage, because national governments around the world are trying to wrestle with precisely the answer to that question. What we do know, I know that Ian's on the call and can give some further detail, is that we are having sequential tranches of funding from government, some of which are ring-fenced for individual interventions, and some of which are not ring-fenced but for general purposes, to fill the hole, as it were, for loss of revenue from parking and from leisure centres and so forth. But what it means overall, we now know, obviously, from the announcement made by Pfizer at the beginning of this week, that a viable vaccine is available. That is now going through a regulatory system, and it's hoped that the regulation for its use can be delivered in the course of the next few weeks. So several things, I think. There is light at the end of the tunnel. We have planned prudently and carefully for the effect of the virus, both in terms of our finances and also in terms of service provision so far. Will it leave a legacy? It undoubtedly will. I suspect the legacy will be that businesses, and I put councils in that frame as well, won't need the same amount of traditional office space that they've historically needed, and there will need to be a significant rethink around that for businesses and the public sector, because people can work from home. Looking back not that long ago, I was attending regional meetings and probably spending the best part of 5 or 6 hours of each week shuttling around to Walsall or to Birmingham or to Wolverhampton or to Sandwell for regional meetings. Those sorts of things will be delivered by teams in the future. But I think that I'm not underestimating the challenge, but I think with the advent of more testing being rolled out, with various interventions like the tiering system that the government have introduced, and obviously the current lockdown, and with the advent of a vaccination programme, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and this will be a finite problem or a finite challenge we have to deal with. But you're entirely correct. There will be a legacy. There will be legacy issues. The legacy issues will be points of learning. I think the fact that, MS Teams, we're conducting this by MS Teams this evening. Lots of businesses around the country are also using MS Teams. What that will look like going forward for, areas which are critically dependent on office space and the use of offices. I'm thinking of like the City of London, the centre of Birmingham. I suspect that the recasting and the repurposing of the high street that we've seen, as more people go online to do their shopping, the same sort of thing is likely to be evident as far as office space is concerned going forward.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my mouse. Beck, please.
Hiya. Yeah, that was really good report, and sort of like looking back on what the councils had to actually sort of go all the activities that you've had to go through, getting all the technical sort of infrastructure sorted for people to work from home safely, and obviously all the key workers that have been out in and around the borough, sort of keeping the essential services ticking over, has absolutely been fantastic, and we should definitely celebrate that within sort of the community, within our residents, and make sure we trumpet that for sure. In terms of the workforce, and this might be a slightly naive question because I'm not actually sure how this exactly works, but you talk about sort of awards for like things like green care and that sort of thing, sort of nationally and going up against other companies. But I do wonder whether there's like an accreditation, such as Investors in People, that we would be able to look at for our council in the future. And I'll say a naive question because the Investors in People accreditation, I'm not sure on what the criteria is, or if public bodies can sort of apply to have Investors in People accreditation. But something like that where, you sort of can get accredited so that more local people come to work for Dudley Council, and that's another form of recognition for staff that work for the borough.
Yes, thank you, Beck. Entirely agree. So accreditations such as that simply are a way of crystallising good practice within the authority. So, I mean, the fact that we are using the Torch programme to deliver our leaders of the future, you know, sitting around the SCB table, I've got Helen Martin, who I think is probably one of the outstanding outcomes of the Torch programme. Last week, the week before, I was welcoming the new cohort across at the college as they start their journey towards that. But we have pockets of similar sorts of things to IIP around the council. Mohammed Farouk and his team in legal services have the Lexel accreditation for excellence, and very many, apart from the case management criteria that's required to get the Lexel accreditation, a great number of the processes and practices that would be very clearly recognised in IIP are actually incorporated into Lexel. So I think we have pockets of that around the organisation that could be translated into investors in people, and obviously the top award is to have the gold investors in people. But it's something I think I'll take away and ask organisation development to have a look at, because obviously on the slide for future council, the first pillar of that is our future workforce, and we are nothing without a future workforce, and we're nothing without a capable and committed workforce. And you know, I want Dudley to be the employer of choice, and the fact that we do have officers that have been here for 20, 30, 40 years, I think that speaks volumes for the way in which the council does things. The apprenticeship levy is being introduced at all levels to ensure we are upskilling and updating practice, because what I want is to grow our own. I'm committed to growing our own, and I think a combination of things that we are doing, whilst not formally put forward as an IIP badge, as it were, I don't think it would be that difficult with putting forward those various combinations of activities to actually get IIP status.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I've got no more hands out at the moment. Oh, sorry, Ed. Yep.
That's good. Hold on.
Thanks, Chair. I just sneaked in there. A couple of questions. My first one, I think, it's Serena asked, and you've kind of answered, and that's how we're going to look back at what's happened and how we're going to build that into the plan. You know, working from home, use of technology, that type of thing. And then a little bit more specific, you've mentioned tourism, and obviously central to that is Dudley Zoo. I just wanted to ask, how are we supporting the zoo at the moment, and how are we making sure that we're still going to have a zoo in 2030? Well,
thanks, Ed. It's a couple of great questions there. I mean, as I first said when I touched down probably 15, 16 months ago, I've got three key memories from the 1960s. One is my first day at school. One is being dragged out of bed to watch Man Man on the Moon, and the second is my first visit to Dudley Zoo. So it's something which is very, very close to my heart. I'm in regular contact with Derek, and I know that we are taking a number of steps. I'll ask Ian if I can, if he's on the call, just to outline some of the steps that we do take in order to provide that support to the zoo. But it is more than moral support. So with the leave, Chair, I can ask Ian Newman to just perhaps outline some of that, the support mechanisms.
Ian?
Yeah, the main change that we have made with the zoo at their request is to allow them additional flexibility in how they apply the grant that they receive from the council. So they haven't actually required additional grant from the council, but they are eligible for a number of national financing schemes. So their money doesn't come through us, but the money we do allow them, we've given them a flexibility that we wouldn't normally give them in how they use that. And that has been satisfactory to enable them to keep open and continue to thrive in spite of the pandemic.
And certainly when I was last at the zoo, socially, as it were, which is probably about 5 or 6 months ago, the way in which Derek and his staff had configured the exhibits was exemplary, absolutely exemplary. You know, don't touch the glass, one-way systems, and so forth. So you know they're doing their very best, and they deserve our absolute support. I haven't forgotten the first part of your question. I've written this down legibly, unlike when I was answering Chris when I couldn't read my writing. How do we build things into the plan going forward? Well, that of course it's the two prongs. It's the future facilities. Do we need to have the same amount of workstations as we had pre-COVID? Do we need the same number of buildings as we used to have pre-COVID? And how do we support our workforce working remotely, which many of them may choose to do? And there is a piece of work which I've commissioned. Obviously, there's you may have seen the emails I sent last week. The work we're doing with the NHS as far as providing counselling and care is concerned, but equally there can be some fun stuff in there as well. So we're developing a programme around for those who are home working, for things like working with a borough artist to doing Pilates, doing quizzes, doing lots of social things as well, having coffee mornings and so forth. So we are building in mechanisms into the process that will enable us to support staff who are working remotely, because even when the inoculations that the government are forecasting to start this coming month in December, it'll take a while before we get that immunity in the population, and a while before we return back to any degree of what we would have seen as normal in the old days.
Chris?
Yes, thanks again, Chair. Yeah, that's just reminded me the working working near to home, or work where you live. Again, feeds into the environmental improvements. Because you're asking people not to drive. COVID-19's brought that very neatly to our immediate attention. I felt for a long time that if you go to a big city, you go to London, not so much in Birmingham, but co-working is quite a big thing there, where individuals who work alone or work from home, it gets a bit dull. It's not always good for your health. You go somewhere else where you sit, you get a desk, you get an internet connection, and there's a cafe, and there's some other people, so you feel like you're part of the human race again. I've felt for some time that where people try to do that commercially, it doesn't always work very well. You need quite a large portion of the population doing it for it to work. So really, without any sort of state intervention or local authority intervention, it's hard to make it take off. And I know it is, because I've tried to do it. I saw this as quite an opportunity actually for local authorities, where they're providing facilities maybe for their own workers, to rather than drive across the borough from I don't know, Coseley to Stourbridge or something. There's a hub somewhere in Coseley where they could work. I'm curious to see if that's something that we could also do for the public or the residents of Dudley, and make it a much wider thing than just the council. So people who want to work from home, want to work where they live, can have a facility that the council provide. Or it's the buildings invariably. It's hard to afford a building, but yeah, I'm just a thought of mine, really. Thank you.
It's yes, and through you, it's a very interesting thought. I don't think cancer has been explored as far as a public offer is concerned, but certainly it is being looked at regionally as part of the as part of the wider public estate, because obviously we will have some of my staff that come into Dudley to work, but they might actually reside in Sandwell, they might reside in Birmingham, and vice versa. Does it make sense that one of my environmental health officers travels in from, I don't know, Bourneville to come here? If there were touchdown spaces that were shared, then that would make sense. But that's certainly a debate that's taking place amongst councils. But I don't think it's yet taking place in a wider public sense. But you're entirely correct. The levels of pollution are coming way down. I know here where I live in fairly central in WV1 in central Wolverhampton, if I left my windows open in the summer last year, there'd be black sort of soot on the windowsills. And I know that One of our elected members from Cosley, who suffers from a chest condition, was saying to me that she's able to open her windows over the summer to get some ventilation and not have the adverse effect that otherwise would be caused by fumes. It's a mixed bag, isn't it? It's a mixed bag of the perhaps in terms of the ecological outcomes, that there'll be lessons to be learned that hit home quite markedly in the 8 or 9 months we've had of much fewer traffic movements around the borough and around the West Midlands.
Indeed, thanks, Kevin. Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. I've actually got 2 points I'd like to raise. One's very much been a sort of, I don't know, bugbear of mine, or however you want to call it. One of these slides you talk about vision, budget and performance. One of the things I'd like to know from you is, how do you see your strategic role in terms of, we have the budget setting exercise really going on in the background all of the time within the council. How do you see your role in making sure that we have a strategic direction? Because sadly, we've gone through periods, quite a long periods local government has, of quite arbitrary cuts to budgets from central government, which have meant that we've had to make decisions in local government autonomously within each directorate, and often an impact for a cut in one directorate will have a direct impact on another part of the directorate. And how do you bring your officers together at your level? Because I see that as your role, that overview. How do you do that? How does that work? How have you got it working in the council? I'd be interested in.
So from my perspective, Chair, it's having a holistic approach. And I can give you a number of drilled down examples of holistic approaches and what it means. So in a former authority, we had a number of officers whose job it was to advise the public on the availability of benefits, what benefits they could get, and how those benefits could be obtained and maximised. And there was a proposal to withdraw or reduce the number of the officers doing that. Because it was supposed that was possibly the work of the CAB or other organisations. But the view I took was no. If the number of those officers, and there's only a handful of them, the amount of additional benefits that they were able to identify that would come down to the local population were several millions of pounds, the next thing is, where would the members of the population spend that extra several millions of pounds? And the answer is they'd spend it in the borough or city concerned. So making, I suppose, and Ian may not, I can see he put his hand up early on, he may not agree with me necessarily, but a holistic approach of ensuring that what you don't do, you don't cut corners simply to make a budgetary saving, if that's robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I think from my perspective, and not just my perspective, certainly the way in which I seek to empower SEB is that all directors work collaboratively. Now we are meeting, unlike in a former time where there was a management board once a week. We meet 3 times a week. We have a business meeting on a Wednesday, and we have 2 meetings on a Monday and on a Friday to ensure that we are reacting to and kept abreast of emerging developments. And that's the way in which I would seek to develop SEB, that it's holistic, that we don't rob Peter to pay Paul. And I think many old school, you're entirely correct in what you say, many old school senior leaders and managers would think, well, there we go, I've cut the service, I've cut that service, I've made the books balance. But what's the output? What's the outcome from that? And if the output or outcome from that is not holistically spread across the authority from a holistic helicopter view, then it's not a great idea to make those savings in that way. They can be delivered in a different way, or looking at a wider picture with regard to the benefit advisors I mentioned to you earlier. Getting benefits in for people that deserve the benefits that they can spend in the borough is a good thing. Because how many businesses might we otherwise need to encourage to come in to produce that sort of revenue to otherwise spend locally? So that's the way I look at it. holistically to ensure that there is a uniform spread rather than robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Thank you, Kevin. For me, that's an unforeseen circumstances concept that we have when we don't work holistically. I'll just bring in Ian Bevan before I ask my second question. Yep, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Kevin. It's very good to see and hear from you this evening. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'd start off by agreeing with you that during COVID, services went on as normal, and from my point of view, with the inquiries that are raised with officers, those that respond promptly and fully continued to do so, and some of those where I have to prize the information out and seem a little bit more reluctant, they also continued to do so. So that's just one observation there, that is indeed business as normal. I'm interested particularly, colleagues tonight and yourself have been talking about the council for the future and how that might look, and we've used words like touchdown and hot desking, and you raised the point of one of your planning officers travelling from Bourneville, and is that worth it? I used to do something similar myself at Birmingham City Council. I used to leave home in Halesowen, drive through the streets of Birmingham, past the areas that I was working in to clock in, and then travel back out. And it's a really valid point. But I think one thing that we haven't discussed tonight is what this will look like for councillors. And I'm just thinking of when we have full council, and we've got 72 people descending on the little car park and the streets around and crowding in. When we talk about a new council, do you think that we will ever return to the council house, sit down in face-to-face meetings, or whether our appetite has been set in a different direction?
I think, as far as full council is concerned, that we will get back to full council as soon as we are able. Like, you've got the fantastic picture of the chamber just over your shoulder there, Councillor. But I think there'll never be a substitute for having that sort of healthy debate that you can get within a council chamber. And it may be that, as the virus recedes, we might have, sort of hybrid where we've got some members there and some working remotely. But certainly, I think for some committees, it may work better. But it is not for me to suggest this is the way things should be. My job has been to facilitate the democratic process as best that we are able in the circumstances which we are presented with. But I would by no means suggest that this would be the ideal panacea or the ideal model going forward. Far from it. I think everyone enjoys the spectacle and the debate of full council. And nothing can really substitute for that. I know I've been speaking to colleagues in law that have been conducting trials by Microsoft Teams. It's not quite the same. It's not quite the same. But we are where we are, and my task with colleagues is to ensure that we can facilitate the democratic process as quickly as we're able to get back to some degree of normality. And obviously, we've got elections on the horizon in May of next year. Most of my morning tomorrow will be spent with other chief executives on a webinar from Solace, our professional organisation, entitled "How to Run COVID Secure Elections." So we're on the ball, and I think, as it used to be in the old days, those who are as old as me will remember either the Potter's Wheel or a marching band. And the subtitle will pop up on the screen says normal service will be resumed shortly, and I think that's where we currently are.
Thank you.
Right. My second point, and I was working out how to put this, but it's the use of our community. One of the things which has struck me, and I am presuming most people who are sitting around this table, that's why I seem to describe this, is we've had grants made available to many organisations, including places like community centres. But what we haven't had is funding made available to local community groups. And many of those are in danger of falling by the wayside. For me, what this has brought out the COVID situation are two things. One is the loneliness factor for many people, and I'm not saying just the elderly, but I think it was mentioned by Chris earlier, you know, the difficulties of living alone or working alone during the day are difficult. We've got many of our children, because in your slide, and families, young families in poverty who are struggling. Because we've got increased use of food banks, and it showed within the slides the increased numbers there. And I can only go by the community centres which I'm involved in. Woollerscote Community Centre, which has now been virtually closed since March, had a vibrant nursery every day, run as a local business. It may well be that they got some grants from the self-employed side of these things, and the furlough scheme would have been applicable to their staff. Cradley Community Centre, where we got a new committee in and actually have been feeding children throughout the summer with help from the public health team. But that's not widespread. And we know that we've got at least, I would have thought, another 6 months of unsettled ways of life. No matter what happens with the COVID vaccine, as one of my colleagues said, if you could vaccinate 1 million people a week, it would still take you 70 weeks to vaccinate the population, and it's not going to work like that. But we've also got a problem facing us with the COVID vaccine of how do we administer this? And many of our local community groups are really chomping at the bit to get involved in a broader sense. And I just wondered if simple things, and I do believe it's simple things, like using local primary schools and community centres and other establishments to administer the COVID vaccine, using bands of volunteers. I mean, we did it for the Olympics. We're looking at it for the Commonwealth Games, aren't we? Surely the crisis that we're in at the moment is far more important than either of those things in the short term for our population. And I just wonder if, in your role as Chief Executive, whether you're getting anything coming down to you about this issue, because for me, it would be a bit of a shot in the arm, no pun intended, for the voluntary groups themselves to feel that they're being used properly. And I'm not just talking about the DCVS. Each one of us councillors sitting around this table will know a huge number of people in voluntary groups in the areas, and our ability to get them mobilised to help out with this and other items such as local food banks, delivering food, going and visiting the elderly. I know I talked about this when we had our ward meeting a little while ago. And just to mention the welfare thing, which I talked about with you there, Sean Beckett's come back to me on that, and I'm actually going to your welfare committee meeting next week to start to describe how we're doing. But I'd be really interested to see if anything is coming down to do this, because we've got an untapped workforce out there, I believe, for ourselves.
I can answer it in part, Chair. A lot of the information that I'm privy to and shared with the other Chief Executives of Public Health England, I'm not at liberty to disclose publicly at this stage. But what I can tell you is that I've asked for contingency plans to be worked up looking at across our estate at our assets. So that if we are asked, as it were, to make a car park available or car parks available for sort of pop-up drive-through inoculations, we're in a position to envisage how that's done. If we are required or requested to make our physical assets available, as in buildings, which ones we have available, how might that look? I've had no formal request, but it's a bit like, I suppose, last October, November, when I sat down with Barry Jones, our emergency planning manager, and I said, well, you know, what's the state of our emergency planning? Is everyone up to date? And emergency planning is something I've managed in various directorates over my career. I made sure that all emergency and business continuity plans were updated across the council, not because I for one moment thought we'd have a COVID-19 situation, but it's something I thought was prudent just to be on the safe side. Equally, I've had no ask, as it were, at this stage to make our facilities available, but we're working up some contingency plan just in case we're asked. My understanding my understanding is that there will not be a view to reinvent the wheel, as it were, and that orthodox channels that we're all used to, when I go and get my flu jab, it's delivered at a local pharmacy. My mum gets hers from the GP. There are tried and tested ways of delivering clinical and surgical interventions or inoculations that are already there. If a further footprint is required, and the numbers are big in terms of those that would need to be inoculated, then we will obviously make our facilities available. But I'm working up, I suppose, contingency proposals with the relevant directors and the Director of Public Health. So if that ask is made of us, we can respond quickly.
If I can come back, I think it's more about, for me, a lot of these voluntary groups we're in danger of losing at the moment. And it's finding some, not make work for them, but there are a lot of people out there who are very willing members of the communities who have big networks within their communities as well. I mean, I've seen some of the misinformation which is coming out about the COVID vaccine. I also know there are an awful lot of people who may need more information, but on the other side of the coin, not the COVID stuff, but the other stuff where we know people are really losing out quite badly at the moment, and mental health particularly is difficult, but also being fed. I think we could make better use of the networks that we have out there at the moment. And while I know the DCVS is doing some work on this, we tend to overload the DCVS a little, and I think we're not getting as much done as we possibly could do. And I just leave that thought in your mind. I've got Ian Bevan and then Brian Cottrell. Ian, did you put your hand up again?
I did, yes.
Yes, and then Brian after you. Sorry.
Chair, I think one of the issues, just like Kevin, I'm privy to some information concerning the vaccine. As you know, I work in pharmacy services at Russell's Hall Hospital, and there is some information that I'm not allowed to share publicly. What I can share publicly is that the logistics of delivering this vaccine are absolutely huge, and I think it is going to be beyond the local community centres. This vaccine has to be stored. This is just some of the public knowledge. Vaccine has to be stored at -80 degrees. Now, there aren't many places with that facility, and I also understand that the vaccine needs a second dose a week later. Now, the logistics of this are beyond the realm, I think, of some of our community centres. Chair, I agree with you that the community centres do need to be involved in delivering more local projects and various things, but I think that this one will be beyond them.
And I don't disagree, Ian. I think my problem is, I think it's completely beyond most of our public sector to actually deliver this on a scale that people will be asking for, and it's that trying to keep people's expectations in the correct places. And I just think we need to be aware of that. I work for HMRC. We were absolutely terrified, I've got to say, of Rishi Sunak's second iteration of the furlough scheme, and we've looked to quickly recruit almost 5,000 people into HMRC to try and deal with that. Now he's pulled back from it. We haven't got to recruit them, but we did not have the infrastructure to deal with that within HMRC. So I think it's just those sort of things I think we need to start thinking about, and it's just place it at the table. So Brian.
Yes, thank you. I'm delighted to hear you say, Kevin, that we're coming back to open council. That's good news. I'm not exactly a great convert of these video meetings. Yes, they do take traffic off the road, and that's one good plus, but I think it's far better. Like a meeting we're having tonight, I don't consider this to be a good way of having a meeting. But it may be the thing of the future. I don't know. Probably I'm old-fashioned, but I still think a committee meeting is a better thing. However, I also think with this working from home, what I've experienced personally is getting officers to come back to me and contact him. You know, I had a case this afternoon and it was only just after 4:30 and they said, oh, he's not answering his phone. I said, well, it's only 4:30. And then I've asked an officer to ring me back today and he hasn't come back. Now, I don't think that's a very good service. So, but probably to think of the future. And I won't be part of that future, I suppose. Again, well, thank you very much indeed, Chair.
Well, thank you, Councillor Cottrell. Now, my own way of working, so I expect my directors and I expect all my staff to work. If I'm contacted by a councillor, that I ring them back as soon as I practically can. And I think, Brian, you and I spoke last week or the week before, whatever it was, around this time, I think. Now, if I can do it, I expect my officers to be able to do it. And the whole thing with our technology is, I've got my reach for my mobile phone, probably 25 years ago, I didn't have one. I never saw the benefit of one, but now I'm contactable 24/7 wherever I happen to be, provided I've got a signal. In terms of my officers and their ability to respond, if they're working from home, they should be available or their phones be diverted during the working day. And that's what I expect. So what I'd like you to do is that, not in the context of this meeting, but if you can drop me a line by email afterwards, to give me some details, I will certainly look into that for you, because that certainly wouldn't be appropriate in my view. That's not the sort of service we should be delivering.
Yeah, Kevin. I've got Peter to come in, and I think we need to close this off, because I'm conscious of the time. It's about 8:15 now. Sorry, 7:15, and we've got the procurement next. So, Peter. Sorry, Pete. No, it is Peter, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, Chair. Thanks for this little. I'll be very quick. I'm not at all concerned how we're going to administer the vaccination when we do get it, because I think this country is showing great resilience in the way it's dealing with this pandemic, and I don't have any hesitation at all in having any doubts at all in the way we'll administer. I thought we were under the impression that the army was going to be brought in and they were going to help administer the injection, vaccination, whatever. So I'm not at all worried about that. And just to point out that, no disrespect, Kevin, but officers have actually been quite slow in response quite a number of times, mainly on the green care issues and stuff like that. But a lot of staff, I understand, are working from home, and it is a little bit more difficult, but it's always been a little bit of a problem either way. So thanks for that anyway.
Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I was down with the Green Care team today at Lister Road, and I probably saw a handful of officers there working in a COVID secure way, with a goodly number of desks that weren't being utilised. The fact is, Peter, that the fact they may be working from home still means that we deliver the service. And if you haven't had somebody responding to you again, as I mentioned to Councillor Cottrell, drop me a line by email and I'll look into that for you personally.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Just before you go, I'd like you to pass on my thanks to the waste and refuse people. We have managed to have a bin collection throughout the whole of this epidemic, and from my point of view, I have seen no difference in that at all. I think that tribute should be paid to those people. Running around the streets in the situation that we've been in, with increased use of far more waste and rubbish because people are at home all day. And I just think they should get congratulations from this committee, and I hope that everybody else agrees with that. Thanks, Kevin, for that presentation.
I would be delighted to pass that on. So, Chair, unless you wish to me to stay on, I shall leave you in the capable hands of Sam and colleagues to talk you through some procurement.
Thank you very much. Right.
Good night, everyone.
Karen. Good night. Good night, Kevin. Thank you very much. Okay. Karen, we've got, is it Nick? I can't remember his name, I'm sorry.
We've got
Sam
Nigel
Turner.
and Sam. Yeah.
Nigel and Sam, yeah, for the procurement presentation, or whatever they're going to do now. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just before we start, Chair, Councillor Cottrell and Councillor Lee have got their hands still raised. I don't know whether they want to.
Well, I think Kevin's gone, so I think they may have left them up. But we need to move on now anyway to procurement. Yeah. Yep, I'll put Brian's hand down for him.
Oh,
That's okay. Thank you.
That doesn't surprise me, Chair.
Thank you. Right. Carry on, please.
Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I'll crack on with the procurement presentation. Just give me a minute to share my screen. Just bear with me. So hopefully you can see the screen. So
yes.
Yeah, great, thanks. So we're following a request from Corporate Scrutiny in July. It was decided that a procurement training would be a good idea to pilot to committee, and then with a view to rolling it out to wider council. So the training will last for about 20 minutes and we'll cover items about what procurement is all about, the DNA for procurement, commercial activities, what councillors' roles are, do's and don'ts, what the procurement rules are, and procurement's response to COVID-19, Brexit, and social value. So what's procurement all about? So put simply, procurement is the process of acquiring goods, works and services from third parties for, and it covers all purchasing, regardless of value, and it covers everything from purchasing paper clips to major infrastructure schemes. There's a number of key stages in procurement. So you develop your business case, you supply select, you tender evaluate, and you award and implement the contract. And one of the most important things is managing and monitoring the contract. And there's also lessons learned, which is very important. It's not really acceptable to just keep re-tendering contracts for the same things that we've always procured. We need to look at how services are delivered and how we can best improve how we deliver those services to get best value.
So can I just say you've got a software centre thing sticking up in the middle of our screens?
Yeah, I am trying to close that. It's not happening. If I snooze, it's not really happening. Sorry. Yeah, you'll have to.
Yeah. Okay. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, bear with me. Sorry, I can't get rid of that. Oh, have I gone past one too many slides? Yeah, there we go. So that's procurement in a nutshell. However, there's a number of reasons why procurements don't work as we hope they will in local government. That sort of slide sort of gives you a kind of indication of some of the things that we in procurement encounter occasionally. One of the main reasons is lack of senior management, leadership, and commitment throughout the process. There can be a lack of an inadequate business case and inadequate planning and resources, especially with regards to skills and expertise needed to deliver a professional and successful project. So very often people will come forward with procurements at a very late stage, and there's very lack of added value from a procurement point of view in what we can actually deliver, unfortunately, which means we have to go out with what we've done before. So early planning is very, very important. So we've covered what can go wrong with procurement, but the diagram on screen is an illustration of what should really be done. And I'm Nigel Kletz, who's the commercial and procurement consultant who's been engaged to look at these areas, has got something to say about this. So Nigel, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Sam and I are doing a bit of a double act on this, so if we jump between us, please excuse us. But I think this is a terrific slide, and it looks a bit complicated at first. It gives a couple of very clear messages, and it really represents current best practice in procurement, especially in the public sector. And this was developed by the Cabinet Office and Crown Commercial Services. What it does is it illustrates that the activity of procurement needs to concentrate much more of its attention on the actual pre-market engagement before we go to market to buy stuff, to determine what we're buying and why, and then on the post-award, once the award's been made, on the contract and supplier management, to make sure that the contract itself is managed well and it delivers value. And therefore, the bit in the middle, the actual procurement approach, should be simplified as much as possible, using technology where possible, online processes, and just making it as simple as possible. So the dotted line reflects current practice in many organisations, including Dudley, and focuses predominantly on the actual procurement process, rather than earlier in the cycle and later through the contract life, where more value can be secured and added. So the blue line reflects our objective to rebalance the focus and our resources with the necessary skill sets that are needed for that early work and for that later work. So it's called the kind of procurement DNA because it really shows what we should be doing, what our lifeblood should be. Sam, you pick things up now.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. Yeah, I mean, I think this is an excellent, really diagram of what should be done, and it's not unforeseen, and a lot of organisations are performing in the incorrect manner in terms of focusing predominantly on the procurement process, whereas the best added value is pre-market and the contract supplier management area. So if we can focus on that blue line and focus less on the process of procurement and more on the before and after element, I think we're going to be in a better place. So what is the councillor's role? So, we've obviously discussed the DNA, which is a very good sort of illustration of the best practice procurement. So now we're talking about the councillor's role in procurement. Now the National Procurement Strategy suggests that procurement should be reflected in an executive portfolio, and it's very good to see that Dudley has adopted that approach with Simon Phipps as the cabinet member for this area. But the key roles for a councillor are, I'm not going to go through those line by line, but agreeing policies, agreeing strategic objectives, and providing challenge and scrutiny with regards to decision making. And obviously there's the local supplier base that we need to consider, so responding to local business demands and resident queries. So that's what the councillors should not be involved with, but there are some areas there are some boundaries that councillors should be mindful of, and they're obviously listed there. For example, councillors should not participate in commercial negotiations or evaluation of tenders, and not give favourable treatment to one supplier over another. Now, there's a link there to the National Local Government Association procurement guidance on a councillor's guide to procurement, which will give you more guidance on what councillors should and should not be involved with regards to procurement. So we've covered councillors' do's and don'ts, but what about the public sector procurement rules? Because there are a number of things that we need to consider. Now, OJU there on the slide, it stands for the Official Journal of the European Union. And any procurements in excess of those thresholds need to be advertised in a portal in compliance with EU procurement rules. The Council's got its own contract standing orders to make sure that the commissioning of goods, services and works are in the interests of openness, integrity and accountability in the spending of public monies, which is obviously very important. And the low value procurements in excess of 25k are advertised in Contracts Finder, which is a government website whereby suppliers can tender for opportunities and bid for works. Obviously, the UK's withdrawal from the EU will have an impact, and we'll discuss this in a later slide. But that's just an overview, really, of the public sector procurement rules. So this is an overview of the rules that govern the council. So we're now going to touch on the council's response to COVID-19. So mainly it was the procurement of PPE. There was a lot of demand from frontline services with regards to the needs for PPE. Council procurement team responded. All business as usual work was suspended, and we focused on the procurement of PPE. And it was a good response, a collaborative response, cross-departmental, working with public health, health and safety, facilities management, and the community equipment service at Netherton, who are housing a significant amount of the council's PPE, which has been a really good, positive news story for Dudley Council. And there's been a lot of collaborative work done with the West Midlands heads of procurement to procure PPE on a collaborative basis. So it was a real joint effort, and we've got sufficient PPE to see us through until the minimum at the end of this financial year. And obviously the central government are issuing PPE on a fortnightly or weekly basis to the council, but we have got sufficient stocks of PPE to see us through till at least the end of this financial year, which is very good for frontline services. So Brexit, now because of COVID, Brexit has sort of gone off the radar a bit in the last 16 months. But if the UK leaves the EU with the deal, public procurement will remain broadly the same. If the UK leaves without a deal, on day one, the bulk of the rules will remain the same, but there will be some important changes. And over time, it should be possible to secure improvements to the procurement rules. One of the key requirements will be to advertise tenders in the new e-procurement portal, which will be available from the 1st of January. And I can, reiterate and confirm that the council's e-tendering system is ready to do that. So, should there be a need, we can advertise in the right area. but there is a lot of uncertainty, obviously, if there is a deal or if there is not a deal. I know we've been here before, but there's a lot of uncertainty. But I know from a Dudley point of view, we are in a position to proceed compliantly, regardless of the outcome of those negotiations. So that's Brexit. Now let's talk about social value. Now, social value, obviously, a very key item, and it applies to service contracts above the overdue threshold that was reported before. But Dudley does consider social value for all contracts, so long as it's relevant and the procurement is linked to the actual contract itself. So obviously money's tight, and we have to make sure that we maximise the council's use of taxpayers' money with every pound that's spent. One of the main issues is how we evaluate social value when it comes to tender evaluation, to make sure that we're evaluating tenders on an equal basis, so that what they're bidding with regards to social value can be measured and we can hold suppliers to account. Social value that's committed is a contractual obligation, so we can hold the contracts to account. And the council is supporting the local economy with the Dudley deal, which is bringing tender opportunities to the attention of local suppliers. We're trying to cut red tape, make the procurement process easier, so that local suppliers can bid for council work. However, we need to be careful that we're not introducing local buying policies, because this would be in detriment to the treaty principles of equal treatment, transparency and non-discrimination, which we can't apply. We can't discriminate on suppliers based on their geographical location, although we can encourage suppliers to bid for work that we put out there in the public domain, which we're trying to increase. So here's just a quick sort of some of the main examples of some of the social value that we've achieved, and these are two of the main contracts that have been delivered in the last financial year. So there's a contract for a new build development framework with Jessup. It's a £40 million contract, and some of the social value that's been delivered through that. We've got 9 apprenticeships consisting of bricklayers, carpenters, multi-skilled, plumbers, site managers, apprenticeships, work experience, schools, events. So there's a lot there that's been delivered. And the other one that's mentioned there is the domestic lifts contract. We've got education and training for the recently unemployed, 1 term unemployed, ongoing, an apprentice, 1 opportunity for a disabled person, 12 weeks of work experience, 210 hours of training. So there's a lot that's been delivered in Dudley with regards to social value and procurement. And this is just a snapshot really of what's actually gone through since the financial year commenced. And I think it's a really good sort of snapshot of what's actually being delivered in Dudley. I think it's a really good thing. So that concludes the kind of training, the appendices here, I'm sure you've already seen the slides, will give you access to the Procurement Connect page, whereby all the procurement guidance, the contract standing orders, all the council training, all the templates are available to council officers, and the Dudley Council procurement portal, where all suppliers can express interest in opportunities, is made available, and we do try and advertise to the portal as much as we can, to try and demonstrate value for money from all the procurement that we are undertaking. And the bottom attachment there is just a full list, really, of all the procurements that have delivered social value from April this financial year to date. And I think you'll see from that attachment there's been a significant amount delivered, and I think it's really, really positive to say that you know, there's been a lot of positive social value delivery from all of those procurements. So that's really the pilot training. You know, hopefully you found it useful, and I'm happy to take questions from everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel and Sam. Just before I open it up, this started in the audit committee a couple of years ago, looking at procurement in Dudley, and I think that they asked for it to be passed to the scrutiny committee. When we had it passed to us, we set up a working group to look at it. In that working group, what we were looking at was how can councillors help local businesses compete for the money that Dudley spends, because it's a huge amount of money that Dudley spends. And one of the recommendations that came out of that committee was that we would have a pack that councillors would have to be able to go out to local businesses and say to them, do you ever go for a council contract, and help them show them the way to do these things. The other thing which we were going to actually do this year, but of course COVID scuppered this, was with the investment that was going to go on in the Briley Hill area. We looked to hold a sort of breakfast meeting with local businesses, where local councillors and officers would be there to talk to local businesses about the opportunities that would be presented for them within the Briley Hill area, and help them to take advantage of that. And I think at the end of this, it would be useful if Sam and Nigel can come back and see how we can take those concepts forward. Okay, so I've got Serena, then Chris.
Yeah, Nigel, did you want to come back with a response?
Yeah.
Can we do that at the end, Nigel?
No problem at all.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
no
that'd be
problem.
useful. Okay.
Okay. And again, I reiterate the comments that that you've made as well regarding the packs. That would be really, really good. I'm raising a little bit of a concern regarding the contracts. And I'm sure I'm not the only councillor that's come across buildings like pubs, etc. There's one in my ward where they're trying to get repairs done, and it comes up with extortionate amounts. I'll give you an example, but I won't tell you where it is. We've had a pub who had 3 steps they want repairing, and we own the building, and it's come to £10,000. And then we've got other contractors ourselves, and it's exactly the same specifications, etc. And it's 3,800. So as councillors, we need to know that the money that we're giving out to these contracts, etc., is an honest and exacting contract. So I'm just wondering how that happens, and if it does happen, what sort of is it a list or something that they can be removed from, or are we investigating it? If so, how? Thank you.
Okay, do you want me to take one question at a time, Chair?
I'm speaking to a muted mic. If we take Chris's next, because it might have something to do with that. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. No, completely different question. I was just a little bit curious to hear there about procurement from businesses, you know, within the Dudley Borough, and any sort of prioritisation there. Forgive me if I've misunderstood, but it appears to me that that's dismissed as being discriminatory, and yet clearly it's being done under the Preston model. And just looking on the internet, I can see why. They've used the UK Social Value Act and various other acts of government that allow them to not work around it, but work with it, so that it allows them to prioritise some of the council spending locally rather than national players. Could you just clarify that for me a little, maybe? Thanks.
Okay, Nigel.
Okay, well, let's pick up the two questions. Councillor Craigie's comment first. I mean, it's difficult to comment specifically on the contract that you're referring to, but we do advertise our opportunities, put contracts in place for them. A lot of the works contracts use construction line, and that's has kind of got validated suppliers that have to kind of, not just any supplier can get on there, they have to reach certain minimum standards, and clearly the council requires suppliers to have in place the relevant levels of insurance, public liability insurance, and all sorts. So it's not always easy to compare a job that's going to be delivered by another organisation without knowing the standards that they're working to. So I can't dismiss that point. I think it's a really valid point, and we can always look into the specifics of that. But in a sense, we have to work to minimum standards. We have to advertise stuff, and we have to make sure the kind of the liabilities are covered as well. In terms of Councillor Barnett's point, the preferencing local suppliers. Technically speaking, we can't do that. The way I've got around that in other roles where I've led procurement organisations is a number. One is that we make sure we advertise things locally, so the opportunities are open for local suppliers. Clearly, they're open to non-local suppliers, but we can go out of our way using councillors if necessary to help promote these to local businesses. The second is to provide kind of support to local businesses in bidding for contracts and other opportunities. And the real secret weapon, or not secret weapon, but the real weapon is social value. So if we're asking suppliers to deliver things locally, deliver social value to local community groups, or do something in the way of community-based social value, really local organisations are in a much better position to do that than somebody coming in from out of borough or certainly out of the region. And that's one of the best ways. And that's real. If social value is done properly, that's a real opportunity to do that. And the opportunity that the chair referred to at the beginning about having a business development event, I think is really worthwhile. Again, I've done these in previous roles. I was based in Birmingham for many years, and we used to hold them regularly, monthly almost, breakfast events. Prior to, or in the early part of lockdown, I was working at a different council, and we actually ran that event on web. It was a get construction going again at the end of June as we're coming out of lockdown, and we had an online event with about 90 participants. In many ways, it was easier for people to attend because they just sat at their desks and attended. There wasn't the networking that comes with these things, so there were some downsides, but the feedback we got was very good. We promoted a number of local schemes, a number of procurement opportunities that were coming in the construction sector, and I think because the action that was referred to earlier from the beginning of the year hasn't happened, probably because of COVID, I'm quite happy that we picked that up, probably working with our regen people to shape and scope an event, probably in the new year maybe, and we can take a judgment as to whether we run it sooner, so it's an online event and can promote the borough, or we run it, maybe we wait a few months until the vaccines rolled out and people are comfortable and safe coming to some kind of breakfast networking event. So I'm happy to take a steer at the time as we shape that. And these events, when we run them, we often get councillors or cabinet members involved to help promote it. They're always worthwhile, and I do think it's something that should be done regularly as a joint thing between ourselves and procurement and the regeneration people.
Yeah. No, thanks, Nigel. I think there was something that was primed to take place with a supplier called Click Business Solutions with Dudley, Samble and Wolverhampton, the other Black Country councils, like a business event, but obviously because of COVID it couldn't take place, and I think because of sorts of uncertainties about the actual impacts and the positivity of doing online might not have the same impact. It was kind of cancelled, but I think we can encourage local suppliers. At the end of the day, they're going to have to come in competitively, price, quality. It's going to have to be, they're going to have to come in competitively in order to win contracts. We can encourage them. We can give them a steer with regards to the e-tendering, but it's at the end of the day, it comes down to price and quality, and that's got to be there regardless of where they're based.
Ed, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on the back of that, there was talk of a pack or some information for councillors, an idiot's guide to, talking to local businesses and us explaining to them how they can get involved. Obviously, we could be aware of businesses in our wards that, aren't working with the council, but could be, but we need that, something to present to them, or, just have the knowledge to be able to go and speak to them about it. I think it was mentioned from the working group.
Yeah, there was something in the actions relating to that, and I suppose in this digital age, whether a physical pack, a physical piece of paper or card or something, or an e-pack, an e-presentation, a variation on what we've done here, and again, I've seen many councils that have how to bid work, how to win work from the council type presentations. Whether that or even just a kind of reference to refer people to our website where that information could be made available. So there are a number of ways, and it depends what works. Well, I have a sense in this day and age, having a physical pack of information is we possibly moved on a little bit from that, but we're happy to take a steer as to what people would find useful for their businesses, and certainly provide the e-pack. And if it's useful to have a kind of, if you like, paper-based thing, then I'm sure we could arrange that.
I mean, just kind of as a short-term measure, if anybody wants, if anybody's got any suppliers who are interested in, tendering for council work, by all means, my contact details are on the slides. Drop me a line, and I can, share with them the process with regards to engaging with the council in the tendering process. I'm happy to do that whilst we develop a electronic forum for them to engage with the council. But by all means, like I say, my contact details are there. Share them with your suppliers you're engaging with, and I'm happy to sort of talk them through the procurement process.
In terms of where we started the conversation tonight, this is to pilot some form of training for us as councillors. I'm glad to see that it's shortened compared to the version I saw the other week. I think myself and Ed saw the other week. I can't remember. But if we're going to do this with councillors, then actually we would need something for them to be able to use. And whilst I fully understand, Nigel and Sam, we're in a digital age. That's what we're doing tonight. A simple piece of card, sure. which we could supply to councillors at the end of the training, that because we can tailor what you've just done. I think it'd be useful if members of this committee might give some feedback to you directly, not within this meeting, but feedback to you directly about how that presentation came across. Because I think this is a really important piece of work. I continually talk about 72 pairs of eyes and feet out there. That's us councillors. We cost the council £1 million a year. If you're looking at it in terms of procurement, you'd wonder what value. In terms of how we see that value. And for me, if we can help a number of businesses across Dudley Council secure 10 million quid worth of business from us that we weren't getting before, then that's a value add, isn't it? So yes, a simple way of us being able to go out there, but also we must have business information and knowledge about what firms are out there that currently are successful in procuring work with Dudley, local firms, that is. I'm not talking about external firms. Whether those are small contracts or large doesn't really matter, but they will have business networks that they can talk to and enable them to talk with others about how they've been successful in this. Because I think Chris mentioned the Preston model, and the Preston model from my perspective is let's keep it as local as possible. And for us then as councillors, if we can understand the social value argument, we can extend that social value argument within the council, talk about what we think social value is to our council. If we have a firm locally that, actually my fellow councillor Richard, when he had a firm, he actively went out and had 3 employees, and at least one of those employees would have learning difficulties. I would see that as a local firm providing great social value. And I think that if we can use that as part of our measurement process, or where they've got links with local schools to bring forward apprenticeships, those are the sorts of things that we're not doing well. I don't think, not just in this borough, but across the piece. And if we can use procurement to sort of kickstart some of that, I think it'd be really useful. So does anybody else have any comments? But I hope you take on board what I've just said in terms of.
No, that's really, really helpful.
To get the training.
Fact, there are some, the example you gave there are a series of kind of national, they're called like themes, outcomes, measures. There are social national measures that can be used for social value. They're quite complicated, but they can be, you can select a few measures and they can be used for exactly that kind of thing, that you give people a kind of social value score if they're doing or if they're giving jobs to NEETs or people with recognised disadvantages or something. We're not there in the sophistication of how we apply social value yet, but it's part of our plan is very much to get there. So it's a really good example.
And we're here. Our role is to represent the people of Dudley, isn't it?
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, that's a very different role to the one that you have. So yeah, if we can do something like that, I think it'd be really valuable. Any idea of the sort of timescale? I mean, you talked about, and it's quite right, at the moment, COVID's swamping us, isn't it, in so many different ways. But it would be useful if we could be looking at some way of getting this out to the councillor before the end of the financial year. Would that be realistic?
Yeah,
for us?
that's realistic, and I was pleased you're going to say that quarter one effectively, or quarter one of the calendar year, quarter four of the financial year. I think that's reasonable. Some of the information we've got, most of the kind of thinking around this is just putting it into some kind of format, and if we can also look at the potential for an event, if it's safe to do it, or if it's not safe, we can possibly do an e-event. Which businesses are often respond to well. So I think in terms of getting a kind of a flyer out to yourselves and to members, that's fine. There's also, you indicated there's a lot of Dudley firms that are successful with bidding to the council. I'm sure it won't be difficult for us to pull off a list of those companies. So you as councillors can say, oh yeah, that's in my ward, that's just down the road. So it'll be useful information. People may be surprised to see who's on there. Or maybe who's not on there. I'm sure with that one we can pull together relatively quickly by the end of the year, I would suggest, and the other action I'm sure we can pull together and do something by the end of the financial year.
Thank you. I can't see any more hands raised, folks. So can I thank you, Sam and Nigel? It was a piece of work that we did earlier in the year, and thanks for spending the time with us. Okay. So
thank
you can go home now.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye then. Bye.
Bye. Right. Committee, I have we've got a question on the council rule procedure rule 11.8. Just before I go through it, I'd like us, once I've done it, I only have to read it and give the responses that the council has given. I just wanted to to ask whether we could have as an item on the agenda next for our next meeting, and you'll see why in a second, whether we could have a overview of welfare benefits and the benefit, the grants that are being awarded during this period. I've got a meeting arranged with Sean Beckett, who chairs a welfare, chairs a number of senior officers, looking at how we help people through this crisis. I've got that meeting scheduled for the 19th, and I'm hoping that Sean and some of his team would come to our next meeting to explain how we're helping those who are really struggling through this crisis. So if at the end of this you can just stick your hands up at the end once I've done the 11.8 as to whether you're happy enough for us to take that at the next meeting. It wouldn't be a huge item, but I just think it would be very useful for us to know. Okay, so we've had the following questions under Council Procedure Rule 11.8. Do I say who it's from, Karen?
No, Chair, you just read the question and the response is.
It can be a mystery for people then. Thank you, Karen. Right, the question one was, can the committee confirm what consideration was given to the Black Country Plan under agenda item 12 of the last meeting of this committee on the 17th of September 2020 in terms of consultation and engagement with people living in the borough on matters relating to the call for housing sites and local green spaces? The response to that question is the matters relating to the call for sites and local green spaces were not discussed under that item, as these relate to the Black Country Plan process. The report was focused on public engagement in relation to the development management process specifically. There is a separate process in place for public consultation through the Black Country Plan review. The next the next consultation stage is planned for summer 2021. Question 2 is, can you please confirm how many awards have been made by the council to those making claims under the COVID-19 emergency assistance grants? The response is that the council has made 320 payments totaling £75,855. Additionally, the council has paid £30,000 to Dudley Council for voluntary service to allow them to provide support. What we'll do is we'll provide the committee with a copy of the document that I've read. I don't know if that went out beforehand, Karen. I know I got it, but I wasn't certain whether anybody
Chair, I
else
have circulated it to the committee earlier today.
Okay, right, that's lovely. And committee, would you be happy or content, I suppose, with the word, for us to have a discussion, or at least some sort of presentation on what we're actually doing as a council to help out those people who are in quite dire need at the moment out in our community? If you can just press your hands. There we are. Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you very much. It's something very close to my heart, and in our ward meeting with Kevin, I don't know if you've had yours yet. I talked about a take-up campaign that Dudley Council was involved in back in the 80s with the Citizen Advice Bureau and DWP, where millions of pounds of unclaimed benefits were actually awarded to people. And it was simply by the council sending out at council tax time an extra piece of paper saying, do you want to, would you like somebody to come around and see whether you're entitled to any more benefits? And I'm going to a meeting next week where we'll be discussing that across the council. So thank you, folks. We've just finished at 8:04, which is a miracle with me in the chair, I know. And I hope you all keep well and safe. And thank you to the officers for helping us to deal with this tonight. That's it, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Take care.